All right, everyone, welcome back to another EventHubs Talk and Block video. I am John Velociraptor Guerrero, and with me today is the disembodied voice of Steven DreamKing Chavez. How's it going, Steven?
It's going pretty well. I've got my coffee. I'm ready to talk about some Street Fighter 6 because that's all I've been thinking about ever since the beta ended. That and Game of Thrones because I just barely watched it and finished it, and now I'm angry like the rest of the world.
Yes,
So here we are.
season 6 was the last good episode or good season of Game of Thrones. Street Fighter 6 looking like to be a really good entry for Street Fighter. And yeah, we've had some little background banter about some of the things that have resonated with us that we want to continue to ruminate on. And what we've kind of developed here are things that you need to know if you want to have a shot at winning in Street Fighter 6. It's not like here, do this and you'll win for sure, but stuff that you want to have at the forefront of your mind to practice, to be aware of, to be ready to do or perform or react to. And if you are ready with these things, you're more likely to be scoring some wins. So we'll jump right into it here. And one of the biggest things that you're going to see the most when you're playing Street Fighter 6 is drive impact. And our line here is be ready for drive impact. Steven, tell me about this mechanic.
Yeah, drive impact works a lot like Street Fighter 4's focus attack, except that it's more of a commitment. You can't dash out of it or anything like that. Once you press those buttons, you're going in for it. It's got 2 hits of armor, I believe, and it basically...
I think it's got 3, right? Well, the third one breaks it. Sorry.
Third one will break it, yeah. And so, like, it's basically a maneuver to gain an opening if your opponent isn't ready. We're seeing a lot of people use that here in the early days. Obviously, we just had the beta. It's a really good maneuver, but it's one of those things that it's really good when you don't quite understand it yet. But once you start to get a feel for it and you start to understand where people are more likely to put it and when people want to use it, you start to look for it more and you start to bait it. And then it becomes more of a, okay, this is actually a pretty big commitment. It's really good, but it's a big commitment.
To me, it's the new wake up DP, which absolutely has its place in the decision-making process. There's a lot of situations of just about every round where this is going to come up, and it's going to be a difference maker in the round. People will see it and resort to it, but at the end of the day, it's really on the aggressor to be able to deal with the wake up DPs, to sniff them out, and to make the best guesses and bets. Now, this is a little bit different from Wake Up DP in that I feel like with Drive Impact, you're almost always going to be able to counter it if you are ready for it, as opposed to like when you make a commitment to maybe putting pressure on somebody's Wake Up and they beat you with a Wake Up DP. It's like, well, sometimes that's going to happen. That still might be the case a little bit for Drive Impact, but for the most part, I think you're going to be able to see it every time, unless you're doing big commitment moves or multi-hitting attacks that are slow, in which case, yeah, maybe there's a Drive Impact that's going to beat it every time. But most of the time, it's just a juggling ball that you need to always have or be mindful of at pretty much any point in a round. But Steven, what are some of the times that you're seeing where it's most likely that people are either flailing with or using Drive Impact to get the job done?
The corner, definitely. Once you get somebody cornered, you're either going to fire one off yourself to try to get the wall splat, or they're going to try to fire one off to get out of the corner. That is like, the corner is basically a get ready for drive impact, it's coming kind of thing.
Yes.
And it's it's all about kind of how you look for it. I felt like for myself, when I forgot it was an option, because obviously I was still adapting to, how the game works and everything.
There's a million things you're juggling right there, right? Are you caging them? Are you trying to go in? If you're the aggressor, if you're trying to get out, 16 different ways of how am I going to get out of this corner? But go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, it's the massive mental stack, right, of Street Fighter 6 that we've talked about before. But I felt like when I got hit by it the most is when I forgot that it was an option, because you're trying to focus on the footsies, the drive rush combos, all these different things. But when I remembered that it was an option, and I'm like, okay, I know how I can use it, and I know how the opponent wants to use it, you start to bait that stuff out, and it becomes... you can kind of change it to become more of a tool, like an asset for yourself, in the sense of like, I'm going to bait this out. I know I'm going to put my opponent into a position where they want to use it, and they're going to think they're safe in using it, and then I'm going to punish them for it.
Absolutely.
And you just wait for it. And it's I think that's where we're going to eventually get. But I understand that people here in the early days are getting caught by it a lot. I got caught by it myself. And it's just a matter of, as things go on, as we progress and we learn more about it, I think it's going to be more kind of regulated in the sense of it's not super crazy. It can feel like that right now, for sure. There's a lot of people who feel like it's overpowered and ridiculous, but I think with time, and I even felt that myself over the time I spent with the beta during that weekend, I got progressively better at it. I started baiting it. I started using it more properly, and it wasn't as bad. And then I started getting to a point where I'm like, oh, I threw out a bad one. That was a major commitment. Now I'm getting punished for it.
That was on me too. It also, what I like about it is as you begin to understand it, you realize the risk of it, and there is a lot of risk. If you try to drive impact out of the corner and they catch you and they're drive impacting you back into the corner, that it's not that you're dead necessarily, but you are hurting from that, and in a couple of different ways, because you're also losing the meter, the drive gauge. When you get counter hit like that, and you just spent two to do that drive impact, or I'm sorry, just spent one to do that drive impact in the first place. But yes, there are very predictable places. People will get cornered and go, oh, just like the wake up DP, I want to flail out of this bad situation, and hey, 2 hits of armor, that sounds pretty good, into a big offensive hit. But the satisfaction of countering that is even better than the satisfaction of like baiting out a wake up DP. And so I do think that this is a lot of fun. It is interesting. It does add to the mental stack matter of factly, but that's something that, that's part of this game. And I do think that it contributes to this game being slower in pace generally, because not only are you really trying to play footsies in Street Fighter 6, but you want to keep in mind all the time drive impact. That's going to slow things down. That's going to mean people are going to do less in the way of commitments so that they're ready to counter that. But yeah, being ready for drive impact, noting that when you get close to the corner on both sides, offense or defense, it's more likely to come out. And then one other thing I would say is that I noticed that people would see me do, as Jamie would do, like low forward into Rekka, and that's a bit of a commitment because, you start doing block strings, low forward into Fireball maybe. This could be something that you use in those situations too, and if you see an opponent starting to try to use it as a counter for your block strings, well, then you do the first move and then you wait. But that's fun in and of itself. There's a lot of strategy that emerges around this, but you always have to be cognizant of it.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I saw with, at least experienced myself when I was getting more wins and kind of starting to kind of move ahead a little bit in the beta, was when I was more aware of where I was at with drive impact and kind of expecting it and just having that as part of my normal toolkit. And I saw a lot of, top players who were doing well in the beta also, like a lot of footage from them. You were seeing them counter drive impact pretty regularly, and just knowing that it was coming and creating situations where the opponent wanted to do it. And I think that's a big key here. It's just having that awareness, never letting that get out of your brain, that there is drive impact. It's an option. It's a risk for you to use it as well. But if you can understand when your opponent wants to use it and how they use it, you can start blowing it up and getting some big wins.
Absolutely. So the next topic here I want to get into, you are usually not plus. And by that I mean in your frames after you've done something, usually on block, your character coming out of Street Fighter 5, a lot of mediums and lights would, and even fierces in a lot of situations when you could cancel them, your character would be plus, and you would get to not only make an attempt to hit your opponent, but once you did, you would have something to do afterwards because you'd be at some kind of an advantage. Or one of the wisdom of Street Fighter 5 was you're only as minus as you feel, getting at the fact that it was there were a lot of situations where even though a character was negative, it would be very difficult to time a reversal, or maybe they'd be negative and they'd be far enough away that the button that you would use to try to then take your turn would actually miss, and it would be something of a trap to actually go for. There was a lot of that in Street Fighter 5. In this game, not only have we not seen 3-frame moves, for the most part, I think we haven't seen any 3-frame moves, so it's harder to take a turn back, but a lot of moves are very negative. And so you're very rarely plus. That means when you go in for an attack, you do that, and then if it didn't work, your turn is more often over than we've seen in some of the recent Street Fighters. But Steven, what do you think about the fact that you're not usually plus?
Yeah, I think that people came into the beta with the Street Fighter V mentality, and were trying to do, well, yeah, of course, naturally, but especially with this in particular, like trying to use block strings where you're doing, medium attack, medium, and trying to frame trap and do all this stuff. Now in Street Fighter 6, that kind of thing gets you blown up with what we just talked about, drive impact. So now there's this shift of like, oh, I need to be more calculated with my offensive pressure, my block strings, my awareness of where I'm at after these strings, how I can set that up so that I'm at a safe distance after it's done. But it really does feel like turns are back in this game,
That's
which
another
is
way of
nice
saying it.
because
Yeah.
yeah, because again, like we were just saying in Street Fighter V, it was kind of there was a lot of situations where somebody just always had their turn. You have a character like M. Bison, who he's just plus on every damn normal he does. He creates these block strings, and then he's got a block string from further out that, or an command normal from further out that crush counters you if you dare to hit a button or do anything.
And you're in a 50-50 of whether or not you want to try to escape or continue blocking. And
exactly. It really does feel like that's gone away so far. Again, we are talking about a beta.
Yeah.
The launch version could be very different, but from what we saw here, it's very much you have to shift the way that you think about block strings and how you're doing things, because again, if you're committing to bigger normals up close, you're opening yourself up to drive impact now. So now it's okay, I can't just go in and hit buttons and do whatever I want and lock people down forever. Now I need to know, okay, I need to keep this tighter, I need to be safer here, I need to understand where these buttons leave me, because if they leave me in a position where one of my opponent's big normals is going to come out and counter hit me, I could be in serious trouble. So now it's just kind of shifting your mentality of like, okay, I need to be tighter with block string pressure and all of that kind of stuff, because now there are turns and it's more of a proper fighting game experience where it's back and forth, and it's like it really did feel like that was the case.
It's less like scrappy to steal away advantages. It's a little more, as far as we can tell thus far, a little more upright, a little more straightforward. You make your attempt, it either worked or it didn't, and then the next thing that's going to happen is we're back to neutral, and somebody has to reestablish a dominance, as opposed to kind of like slip in and, oh, I was negative, but I had this move, or something along those lines. And then another thing about this is that I do think that drive impact is going to be a significant factor in these interactions, but I also think that just jabs and jab interruptions will be a big deal here, because if you're not usually plus and people are using their quickest move to then basically take their turn, you're not going to be able to interrupt them. Like, they're going to have that advantage. Like, if you tried to do medium into medium, if they jab, they're probably going to hit you out of it. But also, jabs are incentivized in this game more than I think at least the last game, because of, again, what we just talked about, drive impact. You want to take lower risk, try to, options to try to get started with things. And if you're just jab pressuring, if someone drive impacts, you'll have the time to recover and counter that drive impact. So that's one more reason why you're going to see interactions sort of going down this way, and jabs being a particularly strong factor in those interactions.
Sure, and it's interesting too, because it feels now like in Street Fighter 6, when you're up close to your opponent and you're committing to block strings and things like that, it now feels more like a rock paper scissors game, whereas it's like you're trying to figure out what is my best option here, because the opponent has legitimate defensive options against you now, and it's like, okay, if I committed to something bigger, like, they could counter me here, they could parry, they could drive impact, they can interrupt this somehow, and then I'll lose my turn, right? And so I did find myself kind of getting to a point where I was, once I started getting more comfortable with the beta, I would go in and do like a medium button, and then after that it's like, oh, I'm gonna do jabs, I'm just gonna pressure with jabs, kind of push myself out and see how they react to this. And if they go for drive impact, boom, there we go, I've got the counter. If not, it spaces me out enough to where we're back in neutral, and now it's like, okay, well, maybe I can just wait for some whiffed buttons here now. I don't have to do a lot, because there's more of a back and forth now. There's more of a meta game of just being close to the opponent and trying to figure out what they want to do in this situation, versus foot on the gas, I'm just going to keep pressuring until I get the knockdown, then pressure more, and now they're in the corner, and now they're dead, right? Like, right. That's very much what Street Fighter 5 felt like, but Street Fighter 6 is like, there's legitimate back and forth now. So you have to just be aware of what you're doing and how to do it.
That feeds right into our next point, talking about how many openings it takes to win a round, or how many solid hits it takes to empty a life bar. Now, this gets a little bit murky because we're not so much talking about a random footsie poke that didn't convert into anything, and there's also the follow-ups after successful hits plays a huge part in this discussion. But we'll start simple and say, how many times do you need to get a solid hit on your opponent in order to empty their life bar? Steven, off the top of your head, do you have a kind of a guess or a range?
Yeah, for me, and again, there's multiple factors here. Did you use level 3 super? Did you use whatever, right? There's different resources you could use.
Yeah.
But it felt like on average for me, for your normal game, and your normal round, I should say, it felt closer to like 5 or 6 openings. And then I did a story about, I did a story earlier this week where I shared a clip where it was a comeback that I did with Kimberly, and it was basically a Ryu player who got me to a sliver of health left. He had a full life bar, and it took me like 5, 6 openings just to mount that comeback. And a lot of like, there was enough time there for them to counter, but I just made the right choices and created the openings, and boom, there you go, right?
Yeah.
So again, it depends on what you're using, obviously, but felt on average like maybe 5, maybe 6 openings for a round to end, which felt really good.
Yes, and I watched a few kind of rounds with this in mind, and what I kind of concluded was, if you factored in a very hard-hitting combo that uses drive gauge plus a level 3 super, and in Jamie's case, I was watching, he can follow up after that too and tack on some more damage. I think so can Chun-Li, at least after level 2. Anyways, in the fewest I saw get it done in was 4 solid hits, and then maybe like 1 or 2 stray, like you got a medium kick in neutral that you didn't convert. But a lot of times it would be more along the lines of 5 or 6. Now, one of the other really important parts of this is that when you compare it to what happened in Street Fighter V, Street Fighter V may have needed a solid 5 or 6 successful openings in order to win a round, but a lot of times with V-trigger robbery comebacks, I think of characters like G or like Laura in Season 2 or Urian with his Aegis, you would get that solid hit, but then be in a situation where the other character would have Oki on you and be able to put pressure as you woke up, and it was sort of like a rock paper scissors game where they got to choose 2 or something like that, and or they just had much more advantage. And if that went well for them and the likelihood of it going well for them was high, you would then take a bunch more damage, probably get stunned, and then be done with it. That doesn't seem to be as much of a thing where you get that snowball offense in this game, and a lot of that has to do with Capcom's efforts to make sure that, hey, a turn is a turn, and then it's over with. And that's not to say that you don't get Oki. It's not to say that, especially in the corner, you can't have some advantageous offense and be rewarded by hitting with more potential to hit again. But it doesn't feel as strong as, say, things that really stood out to us in Street Fighter V, like GV trigger shenanigans and things along those lines.
Yeah, and just to play devil's advocate a little bit here with Street Fighter 6, there are definitely combos that we're already seeing, obviously in the lab and stuff, where you used in all of your resources. That's all of your drive gauge and all of your super meter, and you end up, in burnout as well. But you can lob off like 50, 60% health with one big combo, right? But then even for doing that, you're left in burnout. So like, even if you got that, say you're mounting a comeback and you've got an opponent that's got full health and you lob off 65% of their health, let's be generous here. You still, now you're in burnout. You're in a disadvantaged situation. So now it's the tables are turned kind of thing. And it's like, okay, like, yes, I just did that, but now I'm going to have to work to kind of close this out still because I'm burnt out. I don't have any resources.
You could get chipped. You can't use any of the drive mechanics at all. And you have more recovery when you block things. So all that we talked about with you losing your turn, that might shift a little bit when you are in burnout, because now maybe someone can pressure, as we learn this game better, someone can pressure you on block more effectively than they could before that. And maybe it turns into a Street Fighter V trap fest when you're in burnout. And maybe that's not such a bad thing because it took a lot to get there in the first place. So it's an appropriate punishment for the situation.
Sure. Yeah. And just to go back to that really quickly, of like, it is possible from what I've seen to end turns or to end a round in 2 to 3 turns, right? Like in this game as well. It's definitely there, but it's different. It's different. And it's also like, you're getting maybe I think you're getting about 1 level 3 super per game, right? And that's across all 3 rounds, right? And so it's like, you're not getting that every round. You're not getting that V-trigger every round to be able to do that. So if you do get that instance where you end a round in 2-3 turns, that's it. Like, it's isolated to that. And again, you still have to work to get that closeout, right? Because you're in burnout and all that stuff. So it is possible. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely possible to end rounds in Street Fighter 6 in 2 to 3 turns. It just works differently now, and there's more consequence to doing it.